It happened on Christmas Day, the one day I thought no one could ruin. The table was set with red candles and white plates, Margaret's old china that my daughter-in-law insisted on borrowing for the season. The smell of roasted ham filled the house, and laughter floated from the living room where everyone gathered. I stood by the dining table, smoothing the tablecloth, waiting for my son to say, "Dad, sit here." Instead, he said, "Dad, you're in the wrong seat. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from." At first, I thought he was joking. I even smiled, fork halfway to my plate. But then he pulled the chair slightly backward, not rough, just enough to make the message sting. "That seat's for my father-in-law," he said, nodding toward Claire's dad, Richard, who was still unbuttoning his coat. I stared at my son, Ethan, the same boy I taught to carve a turkey with patience instead of force. He was 40 now, taller, sharper, colder. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly. He shifted, glancing toward his wife. "It's just tradition. Claire's dad always sits at the head of the table. Tradition. In my house." I looked down the table, the long oak table I built with my own hands in 1989, every joint glued and clamped through 2 nights of winter rain. It was the one place that never betrayed us. Until now. Claire touched Ethan's arm. "It's fine, honey. Your dad can sit anywhere." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes held something sharper than pity. Richard chuckled, lowering himself into my chair, the one with the carved initials H&M on the backrest, Harold and Margaret. He didn't notice them. He just adjusted the cushion like he owned the air around it. The family noise drowned into silence for me. Forks clinked, laughter carried, but my world narrowed to the scrape of that chair against the floor. I moved to the far end without a word and sat at the corner, the spot where guests usually sat when they weren't quite family yet. Ethan passed me the potatoes like nothing had happened. "You okay, Dad?" "Fine," I said, though the word felt brittle. I watched Richard raise his glass for a toast. "To family," he said, smiling. "Old and new, old and new." That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not rage, something quieter. Something that knew patience would do more damage than anger ever could. When dinner ended, they all moved to the living room for gifts. I stayed back, clearing the table one plate at a time. Under the head chair, I found a napkin folded in half, Margaret's handwriting. Faint but still there from years ago. "You sit here, always." I slipped the napkin into my pocket and whispered to the empty room, "Not this year, sweetheart, but maybe next." Because in that quiet humiliation, I learned what every carpenter already knows. A structure doesn't fall in one blow. It collapses from the joints. And once you find the weak spot, you rebuild it stronger. Christmas had given me a wound, but it also handed me my blueprint. The next morning, Christmas still clung to the air. Pine needles on the carpet, half-burned candles, and the faint hum of laughter that had outstayed its welcome. My son and his wife had gone home, leaving the house quiet enough for every thought to echo. I made coffee, but it tasted bitter. Maybe it was the grounds. Maybe it was humiliation steeped overnight. I sat at the same table that had betrayed me the night before. The sunlight caught the marks where Margaret's handwriting had once bled into the varnish. "You sit here, always." Those words still lived in the wood. But so did the sound of Richard's voice saying, "Old and new." I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a misunderstanding, that Ethan had been swept up in holiday stress. But the more I replayed it, the more I saw it differently. It wasn't a slip. It was a reveal, a glimpse into the quiet rearranging of loyalty that happens when love gets lazy. By noon, I couldn't stand the sight of tinsel anymore. I packed away the ornaments, each one carrying its own ghost. The glass angel Margaret bought in 1984, the wooden soldier Ethan carved in Scouts. I wrapped them carefully as if I were burying them. When the boxes were stacked in the attic, I sat on the top step, staring at the dust floating through the shaft of light. That's when the loneliness hit, not loud, not sharp, but slow, like a nail sinking into old wood. I picked up my phone and scrolled through messages. Nothing from Ethan, nothing from anyone. The call log still showed our conversation from last week. "Don't bring too much food, Dad. We've got plenty." That "we" felt heavier now. It meant them, not us. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. Charleston winters are mild, but the air carried a bite that day. I walked down to the marina where Margaret and I used to watch the shrimp boats come in. The docks were quiet, except for ropes knocking against masts. I sat on a bench and pulled the napkin from my pocket, the one with her handwriting. I unfolded it carefully, tracing each letter like it might fade if I touched it too hard. "You sit here always," I whispered. "Not anymore." A gull screamed overhead. It sounded like laughter you couldn't join. I stayed until the wind pushed tears out of my eyes, then drove to the cemetery. Her grave was dressed in frost. I brushed it clean and placed the napkin on the headstone, weighing it down with a small pine cone. "Did you see that last night, Maggie?" I asked softly. "Our boy let another man sit where you told me to sit. Maybe it's time I remember what you always said. Respect isn't inherited. It's built daily." A cold gust lifted the edge of the napkin, and I took it back, folding it once more. "All right," I said, voice steadier. "Then I'll rebuild it." On the drive home, the radio played an old hymn about forgiveness. I turned it off. I didn't want forgiveness. I wanted clarity. Back inside, I opened the hall cabinet where I kept old ledgers, mortgage receipts, tax slips, photographs of Margaret sanding the porch rails. I flipped through them, one by one, until I found a note she'd written years ago when Ethan first bought his own house. "Let him find his way, but don't let him forget who taught him to walk." That line hit harder than any shove could. I set the papers aside and made a list in my notepad. The same way I used to plan carpentry jobs. Call Ruth, our old attorney. Review house title. Document Christmas dinner. Dates. Witnesses. Gather photos. Margaret table, napkin 5. Wait, observe. Act quiet. My hands stopped trembling once the list was complete. The room still smelled of ham and cinnamon, but under it I could taste resolve. At 6:10 p.m., Ethan finally called. "Hey, Dad, just checking in. You left early last night." "Had a long drive," I said flatly. He hesitated. "Listen, about the chair. It's just a chair," I interrupted. "I've built hundreds, but this one meant something. Claire's dad, he didn't mean to upset you." "I'm sure he didn't," I said. "People rarely mean to when they're comfortable." There was a pause. "You sound angry." "No," I said. "I sound awake," he sighed. "I'll make it up to you, okay?" "Maybe," I said. "Let's see how you do with nails instead of promises." When I hung up, the silence felt cleaner. I looked around the room and saw every flaw in it. The uneven baseboard, the scratched chair legs, the forgotten dust in corners. Imperfections waiting for attention, just like people. That night, before turning in, I wrote one line at the bottom of my list. Respect isn't inherited. It's reclaimed, and with that I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I wouldn't be just the father who'd been pushed aside. I'd be the man who remembered how to build. The day after Christmas, the house was too quiet to feel like home. I sat by the window with my coffee going cold, watching neighbors drag their trees to the curb. The world moved on while I was still sitting in yesterday's shame. But shame doesn't last long for a man who spent his life fixing things. You either sand it down or it rots. At 8:45 a.m., I picked up the phone and dialed Ruth Holloway, our old family attorney. Her voice, low and measured, hadn't changed. "Harold Bennett," she said. "Haven't heard from you since Margaret's will. Everything all right?" "Not quite," I told her. "I need to talk about my son, and about respect, legal respect. Come by at 10, she said. "Bring whatever you have." When I hung up, I walked through each room like an inspector. I wasn't looking for dust this time. I was taking inventory of memories. The table, the cross above the doorway, the piano Margaret once played. Every piece carried proof of time and ownership. I took photographs of each, time-stamped them. People forget, but cameras don't. By 10, I was sitting in Ruth's office, the same spot where Margaret and I once signed our wills together. Ruth adjusted her glasses and asked, "What's going on?" So I told her. About the Christmas dinner, the chair, the words, that seats for my father-in-law move. She listened without interrupting, just like she did during our toughest years. When I finished, she tapped her pen against a notepad. "You're not talking about furniture, Harold. You're talking about position, symbolic and financial." "I suppose I am," I said. "Then we start with what can't be argued," she said. "Ownership, legacy, paperwork." She pulled the original property file from her cabinet. "Margaret left the deeds solely in your name. No transfer, no shared trust. You're the legal head of household. That means decisions, holidays, even how the family inherits this place. If anyone's rewriting that story, it's you." Her words settled like anchor bolts. "I wasn't just an old man offended at dinner. I was a cornerstone someone had tried to move." Ruth suggested documenting the event. "Memories fade, but paper stays sharp. Write down what was said, who was there, and the date. Add the napkin if it's still legible." "It is," I said. "Margaret's handwriting doesn't fade." "Good," she said. "That's your Exhibit A in the court of conscience." On my way home, I stopped at the hardware store, bought a new ledger book, 2 ink pens, and a small wooden box with a brass latch. Not for repairs, this time for record-keeping. That afternoon I called Samuel, my neighbor and oldest friend. "Need a favor," I said. He chuckled. "You're finally letting me help. Must be serious. Was your window open Christmas night?" "Always is. Heard the music, smelled the ham, saw you standing." "Then you heard him," I said. There was a pause, then I did. "You want me to write it down?" "Would you?" he sighed. "You raised that boy better." "I thought I did," I said. But maybe he forgot who taught him to sit before he stood. By sundown, Samuel slid an envelope under my door. Witness statement, December 25th, 2023. Simple, factual, no anger. Just truth. I spent that night at the kitchen table writing date by date. Every visit, every call, every word since Thanksgiving. The entries looked like carpentry cuts, straight, measured, deliberate. By midnight I closed the ledger and whispered, "Blueprint complete." The next morning, Ruth called again. "Harold, I've been thinking. This isn't about suing your son. It's about setting boundaries. Write a letter. Calm, factual. Deliver it once you're ready. What should it say? That he's welcome in your house, but only if he remembers whose roof it is." Her advice lingered. I took out the ledger again and wrote the first line of that letter. "This isn't about anger, son. It's about order." Then I underlined it twice. Outside, Charleston rain began to fall, tapping softly against the windows. Each drop sounded like a nail finding home. And as I watched it slide down the glass, I realized I wasn't planning revenge anymore. I was drafting restoration. Christmas had shown me what I'd lost. The days after Christmas taught me how to get it back. The morning after that rain, I woke to sunlight breaking through the blinds like a verdict. Charleston had that crisp December air that carries both chill and clarity. I poured coffee, opened my new ledger, and reread the last line I'd written. "This isn't about anger, son. It's about order." It still felt right. I decided that day would be the first of many deliberate ones. I wasn't going to argue, shout, or plead. I was going to build. My first stop was the county clerk's office. The same counter where Margaret and I once paid property taxes stood between me and a young clerk with a name tag that read Thomas. "Morning, sir," he said. "What can I help you with?" "I'd like certified copies of my property deed and household title, please," I said. "Everything with the name Harold Bennett on it." He typed for a minute, the sound of keys like rain on tin. "Here we are," he said, handing me a printout. "Still in your name, sir." "No changes since 2006. "Good," I said. "I plan to keep it that way." When I left the office, I felt taller. Paper-proof is a strange kind of armor. It doesn't gleam, but it holds. Next, I visited the bank. The manager, an old acquaintance named Linda, still recognized me. "Harold, you haven't been in for years. Still paying the same mortgage you co-signed?" She joked. "No," I said. "I'm here to review the household account. I think it's time I set some boundaries." I asked to separate my funds from the joint account Ethan had been using to help with property expenses. I'd set it up years ago out of trust. That morning I ended it out of reason. Linda looked sympathetic. "You sure about this?" "Trust is a wonderful thing," I said, "until it turns into permission. By noon, I had my financial independence back, every penny accounted for, every signature mine alone. I photocopied the receipts and added them to the ledger. Exhibit B, Bank Reaffirmation, December 28, 2023. At home, I began the physical part of my plan. Margaret used to say that cleaning wasn't about dust, it was about reclaiming space. I started in the dining room. I took down every photo that no longer told the truth. Pictures of family dinners where everyone smiled out of politeness, birthdays that hid cold silences. I replaced them with older ones, real ones. Margaret holding baby Ethan, my father teaching me how to plane a beam. I kept one frame empty and set it on the mantel. A placeholder, I told myself. Something honest would fill it when the time came. That evening I wrote the letter Ruth had advised me to. It wasn't easy. I began 3 times before it sounded like me. Calm, clear, final, Ethan. You are always welcome in this house, but it will never stop being mine. What happened at Christmas wasn't about a chair. It was about respect. And if you let someone else replace me at this table, you let them replace you too. I raised you to understand foundation, not decoration. Remember which lasts longer. I folded it, sealed it, and placed it in the ledger under Exhibit C, not to mail yet. Just to remind myself what justice sounded like when written right. That night, Samuel came by with his old toolbox. You called about repairs? He asked. Not repairs, I said. Adjustments. We replaced the brass plate on the front door. The one that used to read the Bennett family. I unscrewed it and etched the words Harold and Margaret Bennett before putting it back. Samuel grinned. Small fix, big message. Exactly, I said. No one mistakes ownership twice. When he left, I stood outside on the porch. The oak trees shimmered in the streetlights, the air cool and still. Across the yard, the table inside reflected in the window, one chair slightly out of place. I stared at it, remembering Christmas night. Then I whispered, "That's my seat." Always was. I went back inside, set the empty frame beside the napkin Margaret had written on, and closed the lights. Tomorrow, I'd deliver the letter. Not to start a fight, but to set the boundary. Quietly, properly, permanently. I didn't need revenge in fire or fury. I had something sharper. Proof. 2 days after I sealed the letter, the air in Charleston turned glassy with cold. The kind of cold that makes you move slower, think sharper. I sat at the kitchen table watching steam rise from my mug and decided it was time. The letter waited beside it, sealed and neat. No anger, no threat, just boundaries written in black ink. I drove across town to Ethan's place around noon. His street looked like every other new development. Neat lawns, identical mailboxes, houses that all wore the same shade of ambition. Claire's SUV was in the driveway. I parked by the curb, grabbed the envelope and stepped out. When Ethan opened the door, surprise flickered across his face. "Dad, didn't expect you." "Good," I said. "I came to return something." I handed him the letter. He frowned. "What's this?" "Clarity," I said. He started to open it, but Claire appeared behind him, crossing her arms. "Is this about Christmas again?" "It's about respect," I replied. "And who gets to decide what family means in my house?" Her smile was tight. "You're overreacting, Harold. It was just a seat." "Chairs don't push people," I said. "People do." Ethan glanced between us. "Can we not do this in front of the door?" "Then invite me in," I said. He hesitated too long. Claire spoke first. "Now's not a good time." So I nodded, stepped back and said quietly, "That's all right. You'll find time soon enough. Life makes space for consequences." Then I turned and left. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing. 3 missed calls from Ethan, 1 text from Ruth. I called her first. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Depends what you mean by okay," I said. I just handed him the letter. She sighed. "Brace yourself. Boundaries are only respected after resistance." That night I didn't sleep much. Around midnight, headlights swept across my window. I peeked through the blinds and saw Ethan's truck idling in the driveway. He sat there for a few minutes before driving off again. The next morning, I found an envelope on the porch. Inside was my letter torn in half. No note, no words, just the message of disrespect folded in silence. I didn't call him. I just taped the pieces back together, slipped them into the ledger under a new label, Exhibit D, Response Received. By now, word had spread through the neighborhood. Samuel stopped by with coffee. "Heard about the family spat," he said gently. "People talk. They always do," I said. "I'm just making sure what they say next time is true." He nodded. "You got a plan?" "I've got a record," I said. "And records build plans." Over the next week, I started documenting every call, every message, every interaction. When Ethan texted asking if I wanted to let it go, I screenshotted it and wrote, "Attempt to dismiss boundary, January 2nd, 2024. When Claire posted a photo of her father sitting at my old table with the caption "Family Traditions," I saved it too. Proof doesn't just live on paper anymore. It lives in pixels. On the 6th day, Ruth called.
"Ready for a formal notice?"
"To who?" I asked. "To your son and his wife. We'll make it clear that property, inheritance, and family decisions remain solely under your discretion. It's not punishment. It's structure." I smiled. "Then let's build it." We filed the paperwork quietly, just as she taught me. No drama, no confrontation, just a legal update confirming me as the sole executor of my estate and household. Ethan would learn about it soon enough, in a letter that wouldn't tear so easily. By the second week of January, the silence between us turned into noise from others. Neighbors called, asking if the rumors were true. I just said, everything's being restored to how it should have been, and that was all they needed to know. One evening, while I was sanding the porch rail, a car pulled up. Ethan again. He climbed out, walked up the steps, and stopped a few feet away. "You really filed paperwork?" he asked, voice shaking. "I did," I said. "You filed disrespect first," he exhaled hard. "Mum would hate this. Mum would hate what you did more," I said quietly. She believed in forgiveness, not surrender. He stood there a long moment, then muttered, "You're not the same man who raised me." "No," I said. "I'm the one who finished raising you." He left without another word. I stood there, sanding block in hand, heart steady. Each pass of the sandpaper smoothed the wood like a mantra, proof, patience, permanence. The next morning I called Ruth. "He knows," I said. "Good," she replied. "Now he'll have to decide what kind of son he wants to be." As I hung up, I looked around the house. The house I'd built, defended, and nearly lost to pride, not my own. The wind chimes Samuel had hung after Christmas swayed gently, their tune clean and sure. The storm wasn't over. But I wasn't scared of thunder anymore, because when you build with truth, noise doesn't shake the walls. It just proves they're still standing. 2 days after I sealed the letter, the air in Charleston turned glassy with cold. The kind of cold that makes you move slower, think sharper. I sat at the kitchen table watching steam rise from my mug and decided it was time. The letter waited beside it, sealed and neat. No anger, no threat, just boundaries written in black ink. I drove across town to Ethan's place around noon. His street looked like every other new development. Neat lawns, identical mailboxes, houses that all wore the same shade of ambition. Claire's SUV was in the driveway. I parked by the curb, grabbed the envelope and stepped out. When Ethan opened the door, surprise flickered across his face. "Dad, didn't expect you." "Good," I said. "I came to return something." I handed him the letter. He frowned. "What's this?" "Clarity," I said. He started to open it, but Claire appeared behind him, crossing her arms. "Is this about Christmas again?" "It's about respect," I replied. "And who gets to decide what family means in my house?" Her smile was tight. "You're overreacting, Harold. It was just a seat. Chairs don't push people," I said. "People do." Ethan glanced between us. "Can we not do this in front of the door?" "Then invite me in," I said. He hesitated too long. Claire spoke first. "Now's not a good time," so I nodded, stepped back and said quietly, "That's all right. You'll find time soon enough. Life makes space for consequences." Then I turned and left. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing. 3 missed calls from Ethan, 1 text from Ruth. I called her first. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Depends what you mean by okay," I said. "I just handed him the letter," she sighed. Brace yourself. Boundaries are only respected after resistance. That night I didn't sleep much. Around midnight, headlights swept across my window. I peeked through the blinds and saw Ethan's truck idling in the driveway. He sat there for a few minutes before driving off again. The next morning, I found an envelope on the porch. Inside was my letter, torn in half. No note, no words, just the message of disrespect folded in silence. I didn't call him. I just taped the pieces back together, slipped them into the ledger under a new label. Exhibit D, response received. By now, word had spread through the neighborhood. Samuel stopped by with coffee. "Heard about the family spat," he said gently. "People talk." "They always do," I said. "I'm just making sure what they say next time is true." He nodded. "You got a plan?" "I've got a record," I said. "And records build plans." Over the next week, I started documenting every call, every message, every interaction. When Ethan texted asking if I wanted to let it go, I screenshotted it and wrote, "Attempt to dismiss boundary, January 2nd, 2024. When Claire posted a photo of her father sitting at my old table with the caption, "Family Traditions," I saved it too. Proof doesn't just live on paper anymore, it lives in pixels. On the 6th day, Ruth called. "Ready for a formal notice?" "To who?" I asked. "To your son and his wife. We'll make it clear that property, inheritance, and family decisions remain solely under your discretion. It's not punishment, it's structure," I smiled. "Then let's build it." We filed the paperwork quietly, just as she taught me. No drama, no confrontation, just a legal update confirming me as the sole executor of my estate and household. Ethan would learn about it soon enough, in a letter that wouldn't tear so easily. By the second week of January, the silence between us turned into noise from others. Neighbors called, asking if the rumors were true. I just said, everything's being restored to how it should have been, and that was all they needed to know. One evening, while I was sanding the porch rail, a car pulled up. Ethan again. He climbed out, walked up the steps, and stopped a few feet away. "You really filed paperwork?" he asked, voice shaking. "I did," I said. "You filed disrespect first," he exhaled hard. "Mum would hate this. Mum would hate what you did more," I said quietly. "She believed in forgiveness, not surrender." He stood there a long moment, then muttered, "You're not the same man who raised me." "No," I said. "I'm the one who finished raising you." He left without another word. I stood there, sanding block in hand, heart steady. Each pass of the sandpaper smoothed the wood like a mantra, proof, patience, permanence. The next morning I called Ruth. "He knows," I said. "Good," she replied. "Now he'll have to decide what kind of son he wants to be." As I hung up, I looked around the house. The house I'd built, defended, and nearly lost to pride, not my own. The wind chimes Samuel had hung after Christmas swayed gently. Their tune clean and sure, the storm wasn't over. But I wasn't scared of thunder anymore, because when you build with truth, noise doesn't shake the walls, it just proves they're still standing. The letter from Ruth arrived, sealed in a thick cream envelope. Inside were 2 copies of the Notice of Sole Estate Control, one for me, one for Ethan and Claire. A formal piece of paper, cold but clean. Ruth's note read, "Deliver it yourself if you can keep calm. Otherwise, mail it." I stared at it for a long minute, then folded it into my coat pocket. Calm I could do. I'd been practicing for weeks. Charleston was still grey that morning, the kind of grey that swallows the harbour and spits it back out as mist. I drove to Ethan's house, every turn of the wheel steady, deliberate. When I pulled into the drive, Claire was already outside with her phone in hand, taking down Christmas lights. She froze when she saw me. "Harold," she said carefully, "he's not home." "I'm not here to argue," I said. "Just need to hand him this." She glanced at the envelope like it might burn her. "What is it?" "A reminder of whose name is on the deed you keep posting about," I said. Her smile flickered, that same polite curve that always felt rehearsed. "You don't have to do this." "I already did," I said, and turned to leave. That night, around 8 p.m., Ethan showed up at my door. The wind had turned icy, the kind that pinches your ears red. He didn't knock hard, just enough to be heard. "I got your notice," he said. "I know," I said. "Come in before you freeze." He stepped inside and stood in the same hallway where he'd taken his first steps as a child. The silence stretched until it felt like a wall between us. Finally he said, "You really think I'd steal from you?" "No," I said. "I think you forgot what was already yours and what was mine." He looked around the house, his eyes lingering on the photos I'd rearranged, the napkin in its glass frame on the mantel. "You've been busy." "Restoration takes work," I said. He shook his head. "Claire's furious. Says you embarrassed her family." "Embarrassment's temporary," I said. "Integrity lasts longer." He sat down at the table, my chair the same one he'd pushed me away from. "I was trying to keep the peace," he said quietly. "You looked so out of place that night. I didn't want a scene." "Son," I said, "you made one." He winced. "The clock ticked between us." "I don't know what you want from me," he said. "I don't want anything," I told him. "I just won't accept less than respect." He nodded slowly, eyes wet. "You know she told everyone it was tradition. Her dad at the head, you at the side. I didn't even notice until it happened." "Then notice now," I said. The air went heavy again. I could tell he wasn't there to fight anymore. He was there to understand what line he'd crossed. "Claire's father's throwing a New Year's dinner," he said after a pause. "He invited you. Said he wanted to apologize." I looked at him sharply. "Apologize?" He said he felt bad. That it was his fault. I studied Ethan's face. He believed it. Maybe this was the moment to close the loop. Not with anger, but exposure. "All right," I said. "Tell him I'll come." New Year's Eve came crisp and cold. Charleston wrapped in the hush before midnight fireworks. I wore my best grey suit, polished my shoes, and slipped the napkin into my pocket like a compass. Their house was larger, newer, gleaming marble floors, chandeliers shaped like snowflakes. Claire's family moved with the ease of money that never had to build its own tables. Richard, the man who'd sat in my chair, greeted me at the door with a handshake too firm. "Harold," he said, smiling. "Good of you to come. Wouldn't miss it," I said. The dining room was already set. 12 chairs. One at the head stood empty, waiting. He gestured to it. "Sit, please." I raised an eyebrow. "I think you should." He shook his head. "It's your turn." For a second, the room went quiet. Even Claire looked uneasy. Ethan met my eyes from across the table and gave the smallest nod. I sat dinner, started politely enough, too politely. People filled silence with weather talk. Then halfway through the meal, Richard cleared his throat. "Harold," he said, "I wanted to apologize for Christmas. I should have been more aware. That table, that chair, they weren't mine to claim. I didn't speak. I let the quiet stretch until everyone was watching me. Then I said, apology accepted. But let's not pretend this was about furniture. It was about place." He blinked. "Place?" "Yes," I said. "Some of us earn our seat at the table. Others borrow it until they're reminded who built it." The words landed like nails finding wood. Claire's mother shifted uncomfortably. Ethan looked down. Richard gave a tight nod. "Point taken." I raised my glass. "To remembering foundations." The dinner moved on, awkward but honest. For once, the air in that kind of house didn't smell like perfume. It smelled like truth. When dessert was served, Ethan leaned toward me. "You didn't have to come," he said. "Yes, I did," I replied. "Every builder checks his structure after a storm." A week later, I received a letter by certified mail. This time not from Ruth, but from Richard himself. Inside was a signed transfer document. He was deeding a portion of his investment property to Ethan and Claire as restitution for prior disrespect. I laughed out loud, a quiet, disbelieving sound. It wasn't guilt, it was pride. Richard had tried to show generosity to erase humiliation, but in doing so he'd admitted it publicly. The man who once took my seat was now signing over part of his own. I took the document to Ruth the next morning. She read it twice, then smiled. "You realize what this is, don't you? You just won without lifting a hammer." "I didn't want to win," I said. "I wanted recognition," she nodded. "You got both. That night I sat at my table, the same one, and placed the napkin beside my plate again. I poured a small glass of wine, looked at the chair across from me and said, "We're back where we belong, Maggie." Outside, the wind chimes sang softly under the winter moon. The world had finally balanced itself. Justice had come not from shouting, but from silence. The kind of silence that makes the guilty rearrange their own seats. The new year rolled in with more light than noise. Charleston's sky turned clear again, and the air smelled like wood smoke and forgiveness. I hadn't heard from Richard since his letter, and that was fine by me. Some apologies are best left sitting quietly on paper where they can't twist themselves into new lies. It was mid-January when Ethan showed up again. I was sanding the porch rail, the same one he helped me build when he was 10. He parked his truck and walked up the steps slowly, carrying something under his arm. "Morning," I said, not looking up. "Morning," he answered, voice softer than before. "Got something for you." He handed me a long rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a framed photograph from Christmas long ago. Me, Margaret and Ethan, all wearing red sweaters, laughing at a turkey that had just fallen off the platter. I hadn't seen that picture in decades. "Found it in one of Mom's albums," he said. "Figured it belonged here." I set the frame on the porch rail and looked at him. "Took you long enough," he smiled faintly. "Guess I had to grow up twice." We went inside and he sat at the table, my table, our table, and looked around like he was seeing it for the first time. "You changed things," he said. "Just back to how they were supposed to be," I replied. He cleared his throat. "Claire and I were separated." It started after the dinner. She said I humiliated her family. I didn't gloat. I just nodded. "Maybe you showed them a mirror." "Maybe," he said. "But I can't pretend it didn't wake me up." I kept thinking about how fast I forgot what mattered. He looked down at his hands. "I know you probably can't forgive me yet, but—" "I already did," I said. "Forgiveness doesn't mean I trust you again. It just means you've got room to earn it," he exhaled. "I want to. I'm moving closer to town, starting my own contracting business. Thought maybe I could use some advice," I chuckled. "Advice? You ignored most of it last time." "Then I'll listen this time," he said. We talked for hours about tools, licenses, suppliers, the kind of conversation that used to come naturally between us. Every so often, he'd glance at the napkin framed on the mantel, reading the faded words, "You sit here always." Before he left, he asked, "You ever going to take that down?" "Why would I?" said. "It's the only blueprint that never failed." After he drove away, I stood in the doorway watching the taillights fade down Bay Street. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I'd been building something this whole time, something stronger than revenge. It was reconstruction. The following week, Ruth called. "You'll like this," she said. "The local paper's running a story about the property case you handled. They called it the chair that built a boundary. They're using it in a feature about elder rights." I laughed. "Guess my Christmas disaster turned into a public service. They even quoted your line about proof and patience," she added. "Mind if they use your name?" "Let them," I said. "Maybe someone else out there needs a reminder." Later that afternoon, I went for a walk. The wind carried the sound of church bells and children's laughter. At the corner store, a woman recognized me from the article. "You're the man who stood his ground," she said. "Good for you." "Didn't stand," I said with a smile. I just stayed seated. When I got home, the house felt lighter. I sat at the table, ran my fingers over the wood grain, and thought about how things come full circle. The son who once pushed me from this seat had brought me back to it, not with force but with humility. Justice hadn't ruined anyone. It had rebuilt everyone in different ways. Richard was quiet. Claire had moved away. Ethan was starting over. And me? I was exactly where I started, at home, at peace, and no longer waiting for permission to sit down. As evening fell, I lit one candle and set it in the center of the table. Its glow touched the photograph Ethan had brought, the napkin frame, and the empty chair across from me. I raised my glass softly and whispered, "To boundaries that hold, and to the people who finally learn why they're there." Outside, the wind picked up and the chimes began to sing again. Not loud, not sorrowful, just steady. That sound, more than any verdict or apology, told me the balance had finally returned. The word justice sounds heavy until you realize it's not thunder. It's a door quietly clicking shut where it should have always been locked. That's how it felt by late February. No courtroom, no shouting, just a kind of peace that tasted like clean air after rain. The story that ran in the Charleston Gazette made its rounds. A photo of me on the porch captioned, "He built his house," then defended its meaning. Neighbors dropped off pies. Letters came in the mail from people I didn't know. Widows, retirees, veterans, each saying the same thing in different words. Thank you for standing up when we couldn't. Justice had reached farther than I planned. I didn't do it for them, but I understood. Dignity has a ripple effect. Ethan stopped by more often after that. Some evenings he'd bring takeout, other nights just coffee. He never sat at the head of the table. He always waited for me to gesture first. "Old habits die slow," he said once. "Good ones," I replied. One Sunday afternoon we went through the attic to find Margaret's things. He wanted a keepsake. Dust rose in soft clouds, sunlight slanting through the small window. He opened a box and pulled out her old recipe book, the one with flower fingerprints on every page. "She made life taste better," he said. "She made life real," I said. "Same thing." Downstairs I brewed tea while he read through the recipes, smiling at her tiny notes. "Less sugar next time. Harold hates nutmeg." He laughed softly. For the first time in years, it didn't sound strained. A few days later, Ruth visited to wrap up paperwork. She brought copies of everything we'd filed. Ownership reaffirmed, inheritance structure updated, public statement recorded. "Legally speaking," she said, tapping the folder, "no one can ever take your name off this property without your hand guiding the pen." "Then my work's done," I said. "Not quite," she smiled. "Your story's proof that justice isn't age-bound. It's just time-bound. Some people wait decades for their moment to balance the scales. Before she left, she placed a new nameplate on the table. "Saw this at a crafts fair," she said. The engraving read, "Built by Harold and Margaret Bennett, 1989, still standing." I ran my thumb across the letters. "She'd like that," I said quietly. After she left, I hung the plate above the doorway, where sunlight would touch it first every morning. That night, Ethan called. "Dad, we've got another job tomorrow. An old widow's porch needs replacing. Mind helping me quote it?" I laughed. "So now you want me on the payroll?" He chuckled. "Free consultant rate, lifetime position." When I arrived at the site the next day, I watched him measure, plan, and guide his team. Careful, patient, steady, the way I'd taught him. When he caught me watching, he grinned. "Guess I learned something after all." "You finally learned what nails are for," I said. Holding things together, not closing them off. By spring, the bitterness had melted like frost. The house felt warmer, not from the season, but from peace restored. Each morning I'd open the window and listen to the chimes Samuel hung after Christmas. They no longer sounded like reminders of pain. They sounded like punctuation at the end of a sentence finished properly. One afternoon, I took the framed napkin from the mantel, cleaned the glass, and moved it to the hallway. Not as a wound, but as a warning that turned into wisdom. The words still clear, "You sit here always." Justice wasn't the court or the papers. It was that line, honored again. I sat at the table, folded my hands and whispered, "We kept it, Maggie." Every board, every promise. Outside, sunlight hit the brass plate above the door. The whole room glowed, and in that quiet I understood, justice doesn't restore what was lost. It reminds you what was never really gone. March came with warm rain and long mornings. Charleston felt alive again, the harbor full of sails, the air smelling faintly of salt and azaleas. I'd started sleeping with the windows cracked open, letting the breeze move through the house. Each gust made the wind chimes sing low and slow, like an old hymn remembering its tune. Every day had its rhythm now. I'd rise at 6, make black coffee, sit by the bay window and watch the light crawl across the floorboards Margaret once polished every Sunday. I'd spent years building things that could stand storms. But I'd never realized peace was something you had to build too. One boundary, one apology, one morning at a time. Sometimes I thought about that Christmas table, not with anger anymore, but with a craftsman's curiosity. Our single moment, a push, a few careless words, could expose the cracks beneath a whole family. But I'd learned something else too. When you repair a fracture the right way, the joint ends up stronger than the wood around it. Ethan stopped by most weekends now. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't have to. He brought lumber once, said he wanted to rebuild the old shed out back. I figured we could make it a workshop again, he said. You figured right, I replied. We spent 3 afternoons working side by side, measuring, sawing, not filling the air with words but with purpose. At one point he held up a plank and said, "You know, Dad, I think that seat at the Christmas table taught me more than all the sermons I've ever heard." I smiled. Pain's a fine teacher. Just don't enroll twice. When the shed was done, we carved a small message into the inside of the door. Respect built this. He took a photo of it on his phone and said, "I'll keep that as a reminder." "You'll need it," I said. "Life's full of chairs people think they deserve. Make sure you only sit where you've earned." Later that night, I walked out to the porch alone. The house was quiet, except for the faint creak of wood adjusting to evening air. Across the street, Samuel's porch light flicked on. He waved. "You look lighter these days," he called out. "I am," I said. "Turns out justice doesn't weigh you down, it clears your pockets." He laughed. "And what'll you do now that you've got your peace?" I looked out toward the street, the oak tree, the steady swing of the chimes. "Keep it," I said simply. Before heading inside, I sat in my chair one last time that night, the same one that had started everything. My hands rested on the table's edge, fingertips tracing the grain lines like reading an old story. It hit me then how life circles back when you're patient enough. I'd begun this year humiliated and hollow. I was ending it grounded, grateful and whole. Margaret used to say, "We don't live in the house. The house lives in us." She was right. Every board, every nail, every scar tells the truth of who we've been and what we've stood for. I whispered into the quiet room. "You'd laugh if you saw us now, Maggie." Took a Christmas disaster to remind me what you already knew. The chimes outside answered softly, as if to say she'd heard. I smiled, turned off the lights, and walked to bed. No guilt, no anger, just the kind of peace that creaks quietly in old wood and means everything's finally settled. By April, the world had softened. The magnolias bloomed along Bay Street, their scent drifting through every open window. The house looked different in that light. Not repaired, not remodeled, just settled, like it had been waiting for quiet all along. The first Sunday of the month I hosted dinner again, a small one. No silver platters, no stiff chairs, just me, Ethan and Samuel. We roasted chicken, poured red wine, and talked about work, weather, and the price of wood. Nothing grand, but it felt right. Ethan sat across from me, not at the head, not at the corner, just across, eye level. Halfway through the meal, he raised his glass and said, "I know you hate speeches, but thank you for letting me earn my way back." I smiled. "You didn't earn it, son. You learned it," he nodded. "Guess that's harder." "Worth it, though," I said. "Everything solid takes time." After dinner, Samuel helped wash the dishes while Ethan took out the trash. The normal rhythm of family returned, not forced, not formal. When the last plate dried, I leaned on the counter and looked at the empty chair that used to haunt me. It didn't hurt anymore. It was just a chair now, not a scar. A few days later, I visited Margaret's grave again. The grass had grown tall, dotted with tiny yellow flowers. I brought her favorite white lilies and sat for a while. "We did it, Maggie," I said softly. "The house is ours again. The boy remembers." I pulled out a photo Ethan had given me from that night we rebuilt the shed, both of us smiling, covered in sawdust. I tucked it beneath the flowers. Back home, the afternoon sun streamed through the windows. I opened the workshop and started restoring an old rocking chair I'd built years ago, but never finished. It had been sitting under a tarp, half sanded, half forgotten. I ran my hands over it, feeling the rough edges. "You and me both," I murmured. "Time to smooth things out." It took a few days, measuring, sanding, oiling, reassembling. When it was done, I set it on the porch, right beside Margaret's old seat. That evening, as the sky turned amber, I sat down and rocked slowly. The rhythm matched the wind chimes. Ethan stopped by after work. "You built another chair?" "Always build two," I said, "even if one stays empty." He smiled, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. "Found this in Mom's recipe book. It was a note in her handwriting. One day he'll sit where he belongs again." I laughed, quiet, deep. She always knew how to end a story. Ethan looked out at the sunset. "You know, Dad, you could have just yelled at me that night. Most people would have. I almost did," I admitted. "But yelling ends things. I wanted to fix them." He nodded. "You did." As the evening cooled, Samuel walked over from next door with 2 glasses of iced tea. "Still working late?" he asked. "Just finishing," I said. He looked at the chairs and grinned. "That one for me?" "Only if you plan to stay quiet," I said. "Quiet's all I've got left," he said, sitting down. The 3 of us stayed there until the sky went black, the porch light glowing soft around us. No anger, no ghosts, just laughter, shared silence, and the creak of wood that had finally found its rhythm again. Sometimes life doesn't end in fireworks. It ends in the sound of chairs rocking side by side, and the soft realization that peace is the best kind of revenge. By June, Charleston shimmered in the heat. The marshes smelled of salt and grass, and the air hummed with the easy noise of summer. Kids on bikes, lawnmowers in the distance, church bells faint on the wind. Life had gone quiet again, but in the best way. The house stood solid, light falling across its front steps like approval. The brass plate above the doorway caught the sun, built by Harold and Margaret Bennett. 1989, still standing. Every time I passed it, I smiled. One morning I went to the local hardware store for varnish. The owner, a woman named Denise, waved me over. "You're Harold, right? The gentleman from the paper." "Depends what they wrote," I said. She laughed. Something about a Christmas dinner that turned into a lesson in respect. "I keep that article on the counter. Makes people nod quiet for once," I chuckled. "Glad it's doing more good than the dinner did." While I was paying, I noticed another headline on the rack beside the register. It stopped me cold. "Prominent builder files for bankruptcy." The name underneath was Richard Ellis, my daughter-in-law's father. The same man who'd once sat in my chair. I read the article twice. Poor investments, unpaid taxes, a half-built condo project gone wrong. The man who once tried to take my seat had lost his own foundation. I didn't gloat, just stood there in that hum of irony only life can compose. Denise noticed my look. "You know him?" "A little," I said. "Guess he finally learned that a table only stands if all its legs are honest." When I got home, I didn't tell Ethan. He'd already been through enough. Instead, I went to the porch, sat in my chair, and let the breeze move through the chimes. They sounded lighter somehow, as if the air itself had forgiven everyone it needed to. A few days later, Ethan showed up with blueprints. "I'm thinking of expanding the shed," he said. "Turn it into a full workshop. Maybe hire a few apprentices." "That's how legacies start," I said. He smiled. "You'll have to teach them." "I don't have your patience," I grinned. "You do now. You just call it something else." We worked all afternoon. Around sunset, Samuel wandered over holding lemonade. "You two never quit," he said. "Not when there's wood to sand," I answered. When the tools were packed, Ethan leaned against the wall and said quietly, "Dad, I've been thinking about Christmas. This year I want to host dinner." "But you'll sit where you always do." I raised an eyebrow. "Even if your father-in-law shows up again?" He smiled. "He won't. He's got his own lessons now." We laughed, not cruelly, just honestly. That December, a year after the night everything broke, I did sit at the head again. The table glowed under candlelight. Ethan carved the turkey, careful this time. And when he raised his glass, he didn't toast to family or new beginnings. He said, "To what stays built." The words hung there, perfect. Later, after everyone left, I walked to the porch, same as always. The air was cold, the stars sharp and near. I rocked in the chair and watched the wind chimes sway. I thought about Richard wherever he was, maybe learning that borrowed seats never fit right. Then I looked up at the sky and whispered, "We finished the house, Maggie." Every nail, every scar, every promise. The chimes sang softly, answering like laughter carried by wind. And that's how it ended, not with revenge or rage, but with the sweetest kind of irony. The man who lost his chair rebuilt his family instead. The storm that began at one table ended at another. With peace served warm and respect finally passed down like good wood, sanded, sealed, and strong enough to last another lifetime.